The Silver Key is a short story written by H.P. Lovecraft. It tells the tale of a man named Randolph Carter, a 30-year-old man who in his modern day has lost the ability to dream. This fate befalls him because, as the story describes, they had chained him down to things that are, and had then explained the workings of those things till mystery had gone out of the world. The story tells of how things like science, religion, all of it had disturbed him, how the world had become too attached to trying to find answers for everything that they had forgotten the malleability of reality that came before these answers. Even though Randolph spent some time in war, even though he traveled, lived a life more varied than most, he still sees the reality he has grown up in to be restraining him. You see, when he was a boy, Randolph Carter dreamed of palaces made of ivory, long winding rivers, lands whose names are hard to pronounce. The story describes these worlds as better. Randolph had lost them, and the goal he has for himself is to find again this land of dreams. His quest leads him to remember his childhood. Randolph's grandfather reminds Rudolph of a key, a silver key, passed down from his ancestors, kept away from Randolph when he was young. Somehow, Randolph knew that this key would help him go to where he was looking for, yet his grandfather told nothing of how it would. Eventually getting the key for himself, Randolph feels a deep sense of purpose in him. He had to travel to his old family home. There, something happens to Randolph, which the reader must piece together for themselves. He encounters a man hired by his long-dead Uncle Christopher, a man who he assures to himself must be over 100 years old by now. This man tells Rudolph he should not be so far away from home, before proceeding to talk down to him as if he were still a boy. He says Christopher will surely punish Randolph when he gets home. What happens in the confusion is that Randolph becomes his younger self as we read about him, and he doesn't realize that the change had ever come. What the peculiar thing is, though, is that he still carries that key with him, and the sense of purpose it gives. The memory of obtaining the silver key rewrites itself in Randolph's mind. He believes he must have gotten the key when he was a boy. Later in the story, he is called to a place he was warned not to when he was little, a strange cave in the forest slope. Entering it, he holds out the key, and then something happens. Randolph skips back home, eating dinner with his Uncle Christopher and the rest of his family. The story ends oddly. It says that Randolph Carter, at the age of 30, has gone missing. His relatives speak together because of this, and share fancies about him. Collectively, they agree something happened to Randolph when he was a boy that heightened his imagination. It is said that the day when Randolph went missing is the day when he received a silver key and claimed he was going back to his old family home. The last paragraph of the story ends with a rumor that he is not in fact gone. That there is, in fact, a new king ruling over those palaces of ivory and long winding rivers. To speak my own opinion of the story, I think the message it sends is dangerous. It sells itself with flowery prose and fantastic descriptions of worlds that can only barely describe that of beyond your wildest dreams. But that is all. It chooses its meaning of life to be something in the immaterial, something which cannot be truly shared with others, even though it attempts to invite us in. It is only a dream, born from a desire to return back when things were simpler, in your childhood. Welcome back to Deltarune Theory. Last time, we went over darkness, discussing what it's a metaphor in Deltarune's plot, while also simultaneously making clear how it connects to Undertale. And a part of that was introducing this guy, Dr. W.D. Gaster. I ended the last video saying that this video will, in part, be clarifying how exactly he connects to these characters, Undertale's very own, Sans and Papyrus. But, in order to do that, we have to talk a little about Sans and Papyrus first. So let me give you a good primer. Sans and Papyrus are some of Undertale's main characters. They show up in the second major area of the game, and both individually guide the protagonist to the end of their journey in different ways, with Papyrus specifically being in focus for the most part. Papyrus and Sans are brothers, and as such have a unique bond with each other. which is a major fact to take into account when assessing them as characters. The conflict surrounding Papyrus and Sans is very reminiscent of serial cartoon shows. You run into them ever so often and get up to antics for a while, with there never being any real danger to it for the most part. It combines that framing with puzzles that gradually increase in difficulty, acting as a stepping off point into the real meat of Undertale, since this area is the one that comes after the tutorial. Papyrus and Sans are also very complementary characters, which plays into them being a comedic duo of sorts, and the game very much so acknowledges this. Snowdin, the area where you're against the two brothers, has the largest focus on comedy in Undertale. This is something important to acknowledge because of the specialness to what we're about to cover. We need to talk about Sans. You see, the thing about Sans is that he's never really important here. He's the reactive one of the duo, and while Papyrus talks a lot about his stake in things, how much it matters for you and his past to intertwine in the narrative, Sans never talks about why he's here. He's just the guy who makes jokes from the sidelines, encouraging both his brother and the protagonist. And with that, you can go through the rest of the game not thinking about either of them anymore. What's required of the player is just that you go through Papyrus and Snowdin, and from that point on, you're never forced to interact with them again. Except, strangely, there's another necessary encounter to be had, and it's with Sans. Sans has one final meeting with you, in the last corridor to travel through before you get to the end of Undertale. Sans speaks without showing you his face, coated in shadow like the first time you met him. He reveals to you things that completely change the way you look at Undertale. He cements, more than anyone else, that Undertale is not like other games. I'm not going to tell you what Sans talks about here, but I do want to focus on something else that happens here, in this room. If you listen to his explanation of the plot mechanic stuff, then reload the game and listen to it again, he notices how you've already heard it before. This gets you set on a little mission of his, where he urges you to load your save file a couple more times. After doing it, he lets you in his room. Yeah, it's really neat. Something you may notice about the door here, though, is that it has the same effect under it as Deltarune's fast travel doors. But let's stop right here for a sec. While we unpack what happens in that room, I want to talk to you about this character, Clam Girl. Clam Girl is a character who appears in Waterfall. You see, last time on Deltarune Theory, we discussed the system in Undertale's world, which makes certain special things happen. Clam Girl appearing is one of those things. At first she seems like a really innocuous character. All she has to talk about is how the protagonist looks around the same age as somebody she knows, her neighbor's daughter. What's strange about that, though, is that she says the name of this character, the daughter, and the name is Susie. I mean, it's Deltarune Theory. You know how that's significant. When you enter Sans's room, you find nothing. It's just a few gags, things suitably gross. Up until you check his drawer. In it, you find the silver key. Clam Girl just in general phrases things very mysteriously. This world has infinite opportunities, but there's a limit to the things you can do today. At first it might seem like there's nowhere you can use the silver key, but sharp individuals may find that you can go behind Papyrus and Sans's house. There, you can use it. Clam Girl keeps talking about fate, what things are meant to happen. Inside, there's a mysterious room, unlike anything we've seen before. We see a machine covered by a tarp, strange blueprints, a badge of some kind, and there's something unique about Clam Girl. Clam Girl got a change made to her in Nintendo's Switch version of Undertale. If you talk to her at the end of the game, she starts her dialogue the same as it normally would be, but a photo album. It has pictures of Sans, with people the protagonist doesn't recognize. There's a card sticking in the back flap of the binder. It's a poorly drawn picture of 3 smiling people. Written on it, "Don't forget." So you never met my neighbor's daughter. But please don't despair, because the time that you will meet her is fast approaching. She changes to look like one of them, one of these characters. To break down what happens here, Clamgonner is talking about Deltarune. The Nintendo Switch version of Undertale came out only a month before Deltarune Chapter 1 dropped. The neighbor's daughter they're referring to is named Susie. In Deltarune, we meet a character named Susie. We went over how important Gaster is to Deltarune in general in the previous video, and by making Clamgirl change into this, tying her closer with these characters, it's undeniable that that's the express purpose of this whole character. She tells us openly, Deltarune is coming. This even lines up with some other things. Like how when the Undertale Twitter account was posting cryptically, it noted that what it wants to show us is not complete yet, and even far from complete. Deltarune is being made as we speak. Yet, wait, the three smiling people. Don't forget. Don't forget is this song we hear at the end of Chapter 1. It's one of Deltarune's main melodies, if not the main melody of the game. Sans is something that comes from Deltarune, which refers to it in some way. But how is that possible if Deltarune hasn't been made yet? Hasn't been completed? On the face of it, that appears to be a contradiction. You may even want to hand-wave it in some capacity, think that this isn't that deep. Well, I'm here to tell you that there is an answer. There is one simple way of looking at it that makes everything fall into place. You're just gonna have to deal with, a little bit, me talking about the man who got shattered across time and space. The big answer, the thing I'm gonna spend the rest of the video explaining. You ready, people? Deltarune involves a time loop. Let's work our way back. We have to go over some foundational stuff in order for what I just said to make sense. So follow along with me. We gotta talk a bit more about the Big G Man himself. Gaster is from Undertale. Gaster is named similarly to Papyrus and Sans. Papyrus and Sans, if you don't know, are named after fonts, and these fonts reflect their characters in interesting ways. The same is true for Gaster, with the wingdings in his name symbolizing how he himself is a mysterious character. The fact that these three are all named the same way implies some sort of close connection. I have a pretty good idea in mind for what that connection is, but I don't think it's that important. Really what matters is just that you know that they are connected in some close way, but this isn't even the only evidence of that. Another bit of evidence is, well, okay, listen. I won't tell you how, but you can fight Sans in Undertale, and one of the attacks he can use is this. The thing about these things is, in the files, they're called Gaster blasters. Weird, right? That's another really close connection between the Skeleton Brothers and Gaster. As a side note, it's even implied that the special attack Papyrus never got to use on you was a Gaster blaster. But that's not even all there is to say about these things. 'Cause do they look familiar at all to you? They actually look a lot like the Determination Extractor. And that's so interesting. The Determination Extractor is something that's said to have been created by Alphys, using blueprints she has. I want to talk about the fact these two things look so alike for a number of reasons. Not only does the Determination Extractor look a lot like the Gaster Blasters, they also look a lot like other attacks that the main antagonist, Flowey, can use in different contexts. Think about that for a few moments. This tool, something that's designed to rip out our spirit, the will to keep going, is also really similar looking to some of the most powerful weapons in Undertale's world. It's crazy to me. It's speculated even that the Determination Extractor wasn't thought up by Alphys, and that instead it was Gaster who made the blueprints Alphys used, which would be supported by the visual similarities between the blasters and the Extractor. What we have is too vague for us to assume one way or the other, but I feel like that possibility is worth bringing up, considering something you might not know is that Sans and Alphys actually know each other. This fact comes as a surprise even to the Papyrus, which makes it all the more interesting. We only ever see Sans and Alphys talk to each other at the end of the game, yet they're also apparently close enough to finish each other's sentences. Sans is even hinted at knowing that these guys exist, something Alphys is otherwise terrified to talk to anybody about. Alphys trusts Sans that much. These seem like such strange pieces of the puzzle, but they slide into place better when we bring something else into the picture. Entry number 17. Entry number 17 is something we went over last time, but I deliberately didn't focus on the very last part of it. Gaster, the one speaking here, ends his message asking something. What do you two think? Two people are present, apparently, while he's saying all this. Now, it's a pretty hot topic who these people are, but I feel certain that these people were Sans and Alphys. The reason why I do is sort of a process of elimination, though what makes Alphys and specifically Sans such strong contenders has to do with things we've yet to cover. So let's go over those things. In order to do that though, I want to lay out a timeline of events. First we start with Gaster being a normal resident of Undertale's world. He's hired at some point to become a royal scientist. Then, these two people enter the picture. Alphys, a girl who has a knack for science that doesn't give herself enough credit, and Sans, another person who doesn't give himself enough credit, but who has certain vagueness about him. It's obvious that Alphys likes robots and stuff, but why would Sans be there during a science experiment? Well, let me tell you. Sans never tells us this stuff about him, but he's actually said to like sci-fi. And well, you gotta remember, he has this machine in his basement. Sans as a character is the reactive one, and as such, he doesn't really tell you much about himself. He keeps these things from us, and the way we get into his room shows that he can even make fun of that fact about himself. But what makes Sans' secludedness even more mysterious is how we don't know where he came from. We're told that Papyrus and Sans didn't come from Snowdin. The shopkeeper here mentions how Papyrus and Sans just showed up one day. And this seems unassuming at first, but the thing is that most major characters in Undertale are given a substantial amount of backstory. Many of them even touch on how these characters were when they were younger, but this is pretty much all we get with Papyrus and Sans, that they just asserted themselves. So, well, you have to ask, where do we even put the time that Papyrus and Sans first showed up? Sans is friends with Alphys, has been longtime friends with everybody in Grillby's, and so on. There's grounds to say that these two have been around for a while. I think enough grounds to say that they've been around since before Metaton was made. So, keep that in mind while I present you with this. The question everybody has is, how the heck did they appear here? Where did they come from? Alright. Yep. Now's the time for me to fully explain myself. I'm going to need you to hold on to me for a bit. Full disclosure, there isn't an extraordinary piece of evidence that proves for certain what I'm about to tell you. It's more like, this is the only way to answer everything. Finding a way to interpret the contradictions present with Sans and Deltarune, that has been the real puzzle. And now, let me solve it for you. It's a time loop. Yeah, like I said before. Okay, with everything in place, let's get into this. Put yourself in an open mind. Deltarune introduces to us that an entire world can be created inside its universe, with the Dark World. In my previous video, I touched on how it makes sense for the Light World to be created in a similar way. Building on top of that, we need to recognize some things. The protagonist, all of these people, are created at some point before Deltarune takes place. This includes people who have counterparts in Undertale. Most of Deltarune's cast includes characters from Undertale, just with different lives, and sometimes contrasting personalities. A fun example of this is Gerson, who in Undertale is that sort of old coot type of character who spins made-up stories about himself in order to impress young people. This is paralleled with his counterpart in Deltarune, who makes up stories as a profession. What's weird about this all, though, beyond the fact that everybody is different in the first place, is that Sans is here, and he's the only main character from Undertale to not have a new design. And you know, that's funny by itself. Sans is exactly the type of character to make that decision for. But I think there's something deeper to it. And so now we veer into a lot of speculation. Imagine something for me. Imagine what Deltarune's ending could look like. Regardless of what you picture, add this one detail. Add that, somehow, Sans, from Deltarune, gets sent to Undertale. Imagine that. And keep it with you. What we went over before. How he would appear there, in Undertale's world, before Metaton was created. He would appear there, while Gaster is still experimenting. This is what I mean by time loop. You see, Gaster is experimenting with darkness in entry number 17. He hasn't created Deltarune yet, but in this sequence of events, Sans is there. Sans is there despite being created for Deltarune. It's this loop around thing, where Sans only exists because of Deltarune, but Sans is also important to Gaster creating Deltarune in the first place. Gaster was shattered across time and space because of what happened there. The vagueness of that, him being across time and space, allows for him to potentially have basically the same perspectives players have of Undertale. Because of that one line, it's plausible that Gaster knows enough about Undertale to make interesting counterparts of those characters. It could even give an in-universe reason for why things are so similar between the two games in some cases. And listen, I understand that it's a lot to say that happens. I'm aware of that. But I think it answers basically everything the two games urge us to think about, with Sans and his place in things. I understand that what I'm talking about here is late game stuff. I still think it makes too much sense. But let me sweeten the deal for you. In Undertale, you can travel quickly to some of the previous areas of the game by talking to this character, named the River Person. While you ride with them, they have the ability to talk about many different things, some of these things being hints, funny jokes, or what have you. But they also have the ability to talk about something relevant to this video. See, there are two messages they can say which I want to talk about. Here they are. Beware of the man who speaks in hands, and beware of the man who came from another world. Beware of the man who speaks in hands is actually a deceptively simple thing to explain. It's talking about Gaster. Gaster speaks in the Wingdings font, and the font includes hand gestures in place of many of its letters. The hardest part to explain about it is actually why we need to beware of him. There are few things, in fact, which point to Gaster being an antagonist of some kind, but this is actually the most direct example of that. Beware of the man who came from another world is the one that's more directly relevant to what we're talking about. Beware of the man who came from another world is talking about Sans. Sans is the only character in Undertale who fits this description, and because of how the sentence is worded similarly to the ones that talk about Gaster, I think that implies that there's some kind of through line between these two messages. Sans and Gaster are tied very close together. We've gone over that. But, well, why do we need to beware of Sans? I mean, Sans is played for laughs, for the most part. Well, remind yourself of the fact Sans keeps all this a secret in the first place. Sans knows what you're capable of, and beyond that, he's the underground sentry. It's his job whether or not to let people in or out. That's part of why he keeps encountering you on your adventure. He judges you. It makes sense to beware of that. Though, forgive me, I've sort of been dancing around something this whole time, and that is, what the heck is going on with Papyrus? If what happened with Sans is true, does that also mean Papyrus was first created in Deltarune's world too? Well, yes, actually. There's actually some pretty clear evidence for that. But, well, it's not in either game. There's a layer of separation here, but listen to me. Last year, the creator of Undertale opened up a newsletter to subscribe to, giving progress reports on Deltarune, and giving some bonus content for fans. One example of this was an interview with Papyrus. There's a lot of gems in here, but, well, this video ain't about jokes, is it? See, the last question. The last question, it's, what was your life before you moved into Snowdin? And I mean, step back before I show you the answer to this. Before you take in the answer, recognize the fact this question was answered at all. Guess what he says? Well, there was green grass, and Sans cuts him off. Sans cuts him off. That's the last question Papyrus answers. See, like, that really wouldn't be that weird. I mean, green grass? That's just like something you find everywhere. But the fact Sans cuts him off, the fact this question is saved for last, all of it, collectively, implies something. It implies that he came from somewhere else. Gaster aimed to help the underground, but inadvertently created his own demise in the process. Gaster's creations, however, live on, with him, in this way we can barely even process. The specialness of Sans, his situation, his relationship with the Doctor, is set. It's all set. It's just up to us to see that for ourselves. Next time on Deltarune Theory, going to walk in the two skeletons' footsteps. Let's move on from one world to the next and talk about the protagonists of both these games, answering definitively just what exactly is going on with Chris.